Mhm.
Welcome back to Imagining Slocan's Waterfront Commons, one conversation at a time. I'm Jordan Knott, counselor for the Village of Slocan and your host for today's conversation. I'm joined by my fellow counselor and co-host, Ezra Bowler. Great to have you here, Ezra.
Thank you.
And this series is part of the lead up that we're doing to the Waterfront Commons Symposium, happening May 24th and 25th, where we're going to come together as a community to learn, share, and reimagine the future of Slocan's old mill site and waterfront. Today, we're thrilled to welcome Gabbie Ledesma from Shorefast.
Hi.
Gabbie,
Hi, thanks for having me.
where she leads work in community science. Gabrielle brings a wealth of experience in connecting people to place through science that is inclusive, collaborative, and rooted in community values. Her work reminds us that knowledge doesn't just live in institutions, it lives in the land and in us. We'll be exploring how communities like Slocan can use science not just to observe our environment, but to engage with it meaningfully and to strengthen our local decision making along the way. So let's dive in. Gabbie, would you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your role at Shorefast?
Yeah, so I'm Gabbie. I work as the environmental program manager at Shorefast. So Shorefast it's a registered charity. So it has the part of or where I work on is in the registered charity part. We have multiple initiatives and different programming. So I work on the environmental stewardship programming, where we lead different initiatives from seaweed project to community science to youth engagement throughout Fogo Island.
Very cool. Thanks, Gabbie.
Yeah.
I've been reading about some of the projects that you're doing. I want to talk about the Sustainable Seaweed
Yes.
Harvest project. Um, could you give us an overview of the project, please?
Yes. So our sustainable seaweed cultivation project, at its core, it's an economic diversification study. So on Fogo Island, the main industry here is fishing, and so seaweed farming is not something that's been done here before. The project is essentially investigating whether kelp farming can be feasible in Fogo Island waters, and it has really been a collaborative project from the start. So it's brought together so us as Shorefast, but then community members. So we have local fish harvesters that work with us, the local processing plant, the Fogo Island Cooperative Society, different researchers and innovators. So the Marine Institute, part of Memorial Institute or University of Newfoundland, who also has funding partners with the Canadian Centre for Fisheries and Innovation. And as it's developed, there's been more partners that have been brought on. So we have a researcher that's studying kelp as an agricultural product that offsets greenhouse gases. We've partnered with a local startup on Change Islands, the neighboring island, that's innovating how kelp seeds can be grown on Change Islands and then used to put out and plant on our plot. And it's been an ongoing project since 2021, and we're now in our second year of growing seaweed with a second harvest planned for June and July.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
really neat. I like the idea of working with people from their local industries and trying to figure out new ways to to get
Mhm.
that to kind of re-advance what may have changed for them. How successful has your pilot been, and will the industry kind of continue to grow, and how do you see that growing?
Yeah. So our pilot's been quite successful. So the pictures that are kind of scrolling up, those are pictures from the kelp from last year and this year. So I think the picture you're looking at right now is from this year, just a couple weeks ago. Um, our main goal was really initially just to test to see if seaweed can grow in these waters, because we know we can grow naturally, but farm seaweed is kind of a different way of doing it. And last year was our first year of going through a full season, and we saw successful growth. But there's a lot more still to learn on the seasonality of growing, whether we can get a full yield that's uh, economical. And our role kind of right now is in the research and development of it. So we have all these partners that we work with, but then we're constantly looking at different ways that the plot and the can be developed, and kind of how, like, for example, like one of the ways that one of the other things that we're starting to investigate is the main kelp that we're growing is sugar kelp. And we're slowly starting to look into, are there other different species that can also be grown in these waters? So we're kind of always trying to be in that research and development phase within this project.
Interesting. I was also gonna curious about what is sort of the difference between natural sort of kelp harvesting and a farmed harvesting system, and sort of what challenges does that bring, and sort of how does it compare economically, I guess?
Yeah. So natural seaweed is really anything that naturally grows around your area. So we have a bunch of different types of species around Fogo Island that grows naturally. And one of the other ways of kind of economic seaweed is doing wild harvest, where you go and you harvest native natural seaweed that's growing in the area. Farm seaweed is where you develop uh, seeds in the water and grow it into kelp. So the process that we follow for doing the farm seaweed is you take a couple native blades, mature native seaweed from the area, and then you extract different parts of it to then be able to produce seeds. And this is all done like in kind of an aquatic lab. And a few blades of sugar kelp, for example, can produce 40,000 blades of farmed sugar kelp. And so you can really have this ability to create kelp without having to take away from the natural environment. And there's a lot of really added benefits to the environment for seaweed cultivation, especially farm seaweed. It improves water quality, so it removes nitrogen. It oxygenates the water, improves water clarity. You have habitat enhancement. So a lot of native species use the seaweed for habitat. You have zero inputs. You're not putting any fresh water, feed fertilizers, and pesticides. And to speak on the economic side of it, there was an emerging market report in 2023 that identified 10 different seaweed markets that has the potential to grow by, I think, almost 12 billion US dollars by 2030. So it's definitely an industry that's growing, and is part of the reason that we're looking at it here.
Wow. It's really incredible that you are able to tap into this market in a way that is benefiting like the local environment
Mhm.
and the local habitat of, of the region.
Yeah.
It's really incredible to be able to find that kind of opportunity.
Yeah, it's definitely been I mean, just as somebody that's been able to work on the project, like very um, rewarding project to kind of see all the collaborations that come from it too, because it really is a group effort. Like, there's no way that this project could have come without the research partners, without the local fish harvesters, without the support of the local co-op. So it's really a community, both on Fogo Island and also throughout Newfoundland, like, effort to make it happen.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah, that's really neat. Also, I was curious on sort of how, like, as we're talking about our waterfront commons and sort of what we can do,
Mm-hmm.
do you have any sort of thoughts or processes, and have you seen sort of our site at all and just our community, or and are there any thoughts of like how can we sort of tap into the type of developments that Shorefast may have to kind of encourage people to think about what opportunities we may have in this area?
Yeah, I think so. Speaking to kind of how my experience with how we've done projects with Shorefast and initiatives here, I think there's a lot of benefit with also looking at what assets and skills already exist. So, for example, for the seaweed project, one of the things that was pointed out is kind of what already is here. So you have a community that has generational knowledge about the sea, and they're already familiar with kelp. It's been traditionally used as for gardens, and you also have an active fishing industry. So skills are already exist and have a natural overlap from kelp farming to existing small fishing enterprises. And then we also have a processing plant. And so kind of looking at what infrastructure and skills already exist, I think is super beneficial. And then thinking kind of forward of what can be added that didn't exist before, but might be a good fit. So for example, like seaweed was looked at as this emerging market. So it was this potential opportunity that had a lot of economic benefit. But then also, our waters are an asset in itself. So kelp really likes cold waters, or it needs cold waters to grow. And our waters are cold, they're clean, and they're nutrient rich. And we're also situated in a an area where you have, well, globally, there's climate change. So you have actively warming waters. And so areas where maybe farming was traditionally done for a while might not be, are struggling a bit because of the warming waters. But now our area might actually be situated in kind of a sweet spot of being able to cultivate kelp in that way. And that's really kind of looking forward of seeing that economic resilience piece. So warming waters are something that you have to, it exists and it's happening. And so seeing like how do you have that resilience on an economic standpoint of saying what do you do with this situation that's happening. There's kind of this saying of like looking for what's strong rather than what's wrong. And I think that was really born also, or that really applies to kind of that project in itself too. But really just like a takeaway of saying recognizing kind of the future potential and what could be by using the skills and the infrastructure of what's kind of already there, is kind of ways that has been applied to stuff that we do here.
Cool. And does that sort of tie into like your other projects that you guys do, like your GIS and citizen science sort of projects?
Yeah, definitely. So for the community science projects, that was really born out of recognizing that community members have these lived experience and in the area and are already kind of experts of their areas. So then it was kind of looking at, well, academia and government are sometimes doing work around this area because it's important to different environmental needs. But then how do you kind of bridge both community knowledge and this work that's being done to scale up efforts in environmental work? And so our main goal was like looking at what was going on in the area, and then what do communities care about or have significant stake in, and then how do you bring that together to make meaningful change, is kind of with that community science project. And then the GIS piece kind of feeds in by saying, well, once you have that information, like how do you make it powerful? So academic or academia and government kind of have their own ways of communicating their information that they collect, which is great for the infrastructure that they're working within. But then a lot of times it doesn't reach down into community because it's a different type of communication style. So for example, like within academia, I have background in academia, and the way that that's communicated mainly is within papers, but it's never going to be an effective way to like reach community members. And so the GIS part was really born to try to find a way to make the information powerful for community members, because they also are a huge stakeholder in environmental information that's being gathered. And so it's kind of trying to make sure that it's housed in a way that can reach and be accessible by community.
Mhm. That's really cool. And so how do you then sort of use that information, and what type of data are you kind of asking people to help you figure out?
Yeah. Well, so for one of the initiatives that we had in this past fall was a green crab monitoring program. So green crab is an invasive species to these waters that had not been detected around Fogo Island before, but it had become a big problem on the south coast of Newfoundland and the west coast of Newfoundland. And green crab are, like I said, invasive, and they can cause a lot of problems for the ecosystem. They tear up habitats. They tear up eelgrass, which is very important habitats for juvenile fish. And they don't have any natural predators, so they can reproduce really easily. They can survive on land and freshwater. They're just bad guys all around. And we recognize that this area, even though there hadn't been necessarily a direct green crab threat, there was still this perceived threat that it could eventually come up and harm kind of the ecosystem up here. And it could be especially troublesome for fish harvesters. And so we had, with the Departments of Fisheries and Oceans, had a program where we provided community members and fishers with traps to, we had traps, bait, and rope, where basically they put it in the water and then brought them up and then brought up kind of a sample to see if there's any green crab in the traps. And that's kind of the way the program worked. And they just did this continuously for, I think, a couple months when we started it. And through that, we ended up detecting the first green crab in Fogo Island waters. And what turned into one crab turned into 27 crabs. And what that did is initiated a response with the government to now have this area be one of the focus areas for the summer, to really get a handle before they become established here. But through this program, what we're doing is also taking the information that people were collecting with their traps. So if you pull up a trap and you have, let's say, like, people would have 12 rock crabs, one sculpin, or whatever it may be, then they input that data, they get that to us. And then we put that onto our Fogo Island Atlas, which is our GIS platform. So that way people can keep track of whether green crab was found, and if it was, where it was found, and where people are trapping. So people could know in live time whether or not things were being found.
That's really neat. Jordan, is there any other sort of topics that we've talked about that you kind of wanted to get into there? I kind of skipped over your
No, no.
a couple of thoughts there, but
Um,
I'm curious if you have any sort of different angles on some of the two projects that we've talked about already.
yeah. I think I just want to say that it's been just really inspiring to hear you talk about these projects, and just talk about the idea of capturing this local knowledge, and building this,
Mm-hmm.
building up the local economy from the foundations of the
Mm-hmm.
knowledge that exists in these places, and really involving the entire community in participating in these efforts in the way that you're talking about with this, like with the green crab monitoring and that kind of thing. So
Mm-hmm.
it's been a really powerful conversation to listen to for me, because I think that this whole idea of focusing on what is strong is really
Mm-hmm.
going to be central to how we approach the future of our community here, and building up the local economy. Um, was there anything else that we wanted to cover here, Ezra, before we sign off? Or?
I think that's pretty good. I think we got a good idea of sort of how you guys, work with your communities, and some of the neat efforts that you guys have been doing towards raising awareness and giving people a bit of an economic boost. It's really inspiring, like Councillor Knott said. And I think we've really enjoyed our conversation, and it's been a pleasure to meet you and to hear what you guys are doing, and even if it's on the other side of Canada.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for having me. I love talking about this.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for joining us, Gabbie. It's again, like, just been it's always so interesting to hear the creative ways that people are approaching these kinds of problems, and the solutions that people are finding, that have these compounding benefits, right? Benefiting the local economy, and also benefiting the local environment,
Mm-hmm.
because those things don't always go hand in hand. So it's really quite cool to see that there are projects that can exist, that meet lots of different needs. So again, just thank you so much for joining us, and thanks Ezra for being part of this conversation. And just thanks to everybody who's listening in and tuning in and walking down this path with us. If today's episode sparked something for you, we'd love to see you at the symposium on the 24th and 25th. Come out in person and listen to the speakers that we're bringing in, and really participate in in imagining and helping to shape what's next for the Slocan waterfront. So head on over to waterfrontcommons.ca to learn more. And until next time, thanks everyone.
Cheers.